Thank you. With that, technical session 4 comes to an end. And now we are moving on to the last technical session of this event, World Environment Day. We are happy to invite Sri Subir Ghosh. And he'll be, this is technical session number 5, and it is about greenwashing. The topic is greenwashing. And I'll just share a brief profile about Mr. Subir Ghosh. He is actually an independent journalist and a writer and a researcher who writes about environment, corruption, chronic capitalism, conflict, wildlife, and cinema. And he is the author of 2 books and has co-authored 2 more with others. In mainstream media, he has worked with the Press Trust of India, PTI, the Telegraph, and the Daily News and the Analysis, DNA. And he has handled communications and publications for the Center for Science and Environment, CSE, the Wildlife Trust of India, WTI, the Federation of Hotels and Restaurant Associations of India, FHRAI, and SPG publications. Over the years, he has been a columnist for a host of publications, including First Post, Kindle, Asian Correspondent, the Asian, Yuva, and the Impal Free Press, and among others. He's a co-founder and executive editor of textfash.com, a cutting-edge digital publication which explores the global textiles, apparel, fashion industry through the interface between academic rigor and journalistic finesse, and writes, edits, reports, and designs professionally trained and qualified photographer. So now we welcome Mr. Subir Ghosh for this session of last technical session. And over to you, sir, for your thought process on consumer protection, greenwashing, misleading the consumers. Is greenwashing covered under regulatory purview? That's a topic under which you are going to share your thought process. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sivaraman, and thank you also, Ramaji, for inviting me to this event. Say, I am a journalist, and say I am not going to make any PowerPoint presentations, but so I mean, I'm also not going to tell you about elementary things about greenwashing, because you can always Google that up. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take you through a personal journey over the last 30 odd years, and I will tell you just how I landed here. There's just one thing that you need to keep in mind, that a lot of things that I will say today would be mostly from the textiles and apparel industry point of view, but almost all of it would be applicable kind of across the board. And one thing I also need to point out beforehand is that I don't know whether it is good or bad, is that I am not beholden to industry, and I'm also not beholden to the government or anyone for that matter. So my thing is going to be absolutely agnostic, and it's devoid of any ideology. Now, where do we start? Let's start at the very beginning. At the very beginning, in the sense of where modern environmental history begins. Modern environmental history begins with the Earth Summit of June 1992, which was the UNCED, UNCED, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. It is also known, or rather better known, as the Rio Summit, which happened in June 1992. Just as we speak, it was exactly about 31 years ago. A lot has happened since then. The UNCED, the Rio Summit, resulted in 3 things. The Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, there was Agenda 21, and there were the Forest Principles. Now, 2 other things also came out of the Rio Summit. The first was the UNFCCC, and also the CBD, which is the Convention on Biological Diversity. Now, this is the beginning of modern environmental history, but you can also go back a little bit, probably, actually not that, about 20 years. So the first ever move on trying to work on environmental issues was made in 1972, which resulted in the Stockholm Declaration, which was also in the month of June 1972. This resulted in 1983 with the UN Secretary General Javier Perez de Cuellar forming the WCED, which is the World Commission on Environment and Development, which is better known as the Brundtland Commission, because it was headed by the former Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland. This resulted in the publication of a report, which is better known as the Brundtland Commission report. It was titled Our Common Future. It is this document that lays even today, 40 years later, more or less 40 years later, it lays the fundamentals of what we today even understand as sustainable development. The Brundtland Commission report actually led eventually to the EU summit, and what today we have are a cluster of conventions, lot of other UN agencies working on all these issues. Now, this is also something that I have more or less seen firsthand. I joined journalism in the very early 1990s, and just a few months after I joined journalism, the EU summit was held. So my personal career in journalism has more or less kind of grown, seeing all these things firsthand, right, more or less from the beginning. That is more or less in very brief, modern environmental history. I mean, it's not fair to do that in about 2-3 minutes. I know that, but that will give you a fairly good idea where we have progressed in the last about 30 years, from 1992 to today, 2023. Now, let us look at another development which happened parallelly, which is our subject of the matter today, which is greenwashing. Now, there are lots of definitions about greenwashing. One was mentioned by an earlier speaker, and which I need to vehemently disagree with, for the simple reason that that was only one aspect of greenwashing, that is misleading claims. Now, if you look up the Wikipedia entry on greenwashing, you will find that there are at least 6 other forms of greenwashing which are just as bad or probably worse. Now, that needs to be kept in mind, because you cannot handle greenwashing unless you know what greenwashing actually is. Greenwashing is just a term which is akin to whitewashing. I mean, you have something dark, murky, you just paint it over, you just whitewash it, and then it becomes clean. Greenwashing, in simple words, is just that. You do something environmentally harmful or degrading, and you do something else to paint it all over with a green brush, trying to show that you are actually doing something which is beneficial to the environment, which it is not. And that is absolutely the reason why it is called greenwashing. Now, where does the term come from? Now, if you look at it parallelly, this term greenwashing was mentioned for the first time in 1986. Now, look at it parallelly. This was absolutely also the time when Gro Harlem Brundtland was working on the commission on the WCED. In 1986, an environmentalist, or rather an ecologist, actually a qualified ecologist, was staying in a hotel in New York, I think. Now, he noticed one thing, that the hotel industry at that time was putting up notices in the hotel rooms saying that about the usage of towels, and saying, please save the environment in terms of towel usage. Now, what he saw was that the hotels were telling you to save out on towels, but on the other hand, they were doing nothing about energy usage. They were nothing doing about water usage. So what he realized was this was just a reputable, a profitable way of showing environmental consciousness, while at the same time being actually environmentally harmful. That is where the term greenwashing comes from. So this is 86 here and 87 there, which is the Brundtland Commission report. Now, the first time that this was actually comprehensive, used in the sense of being hard hitting, was during the 1992 Rio Summit. That was when Greenpeace brought out a leaflet or a kind of a brochure or pamphlet, you can say, which was titled the Book of Greenwashing. It was essentially documenting the corporate takeover of the 1992 Rio Summit. Now, this document was kind of expanded by the Third World Network, and which became, just let me read it out to you, Greenwashing, the reality behind corporate environmentalism. This kind of tells you what the subject matter was, kind of itself. Now, what was happening parallelly around the same time? No, you have one hand experts working on environmental issues. Then you had the people looking at environmental issues in a different way. And third one was kind of quantifying what was going on. But this happened in more or less actually in 1991, even just a year before the Rio Summit. The American Marketing Association, in a kind of a study, found out that about almost between 50 to 60% of all environmental claims had at least one deceptive claim. This is so this greenwashing thing actually kind of starts from the very 80s and 90s only. But the reaction came in the US. The reaction came in the very late 1990s, in 1998, when the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, issued its first set of green guidelines. So that is where it's just not about environmental regulations. It's also about what you say or what you communicate about the environment to the public. That is where the subject of greenwashing kind of enters the public discourse. Now you would have been seeing and reading about greenwashing here and there all the time for the last couple of years, and you will also notice this has been kind of reaching a peak almost, which is the reason why you have a session on greenwashing at an event like this today. But 5 years later, you wouldn't have had a session on greenwashing. But today you have it. Why is it so now? It's extremely important to understand this, why it has happened so now. And again, I will take you on a very personal level. See, I entered college in the very early 1980s. At that time, I lived in a very small township, and we since it was not even a town, it was a small township, and I personally and all people of my age knew very little about anything called the environment. The environment probably did not exist as such. So there was a classmate of mine who happened to go to Delhi, and he enrolled in a subject called PAC in Environmental Sciences. At that time, we had no clue what it was. I'm talking about the very early 1980s. And he also told me, in fact, that why did you come and take up this course? I said, no, I would rather prefer mathematics, and that is where I went. But this will tell you what has changed drastically in the last 40 years. Today, every college for the name, and definitely every university, now which more or less deals with sciences, etc., they all have courses on environmental sciences, ranging from just basic environmental sciences to environmental engineering to everything. The world itself, in that sense, has changed totally. All in the last 40 years, from what I have seen, and which is why I can keep on repeating that this is a personal journey, and that is why I can tell you what has changed in the last 30, 40 years. Now, greenwashing as a term, was brought into the parlance in 1986, but it gained common currency only in 1999, when the Oxford English Dictionary introduced the word. So since then, it has more or less been gaining acceptance, or rather, let's put it this way, it has been increasing in terms of usage. Now, greenwashing, environmental activism, these have grown very slowly. In the very early 1990s, after the 1922 Rio Summit, you had a kind of a little bit of you can't call it a boom really, but you had a little bit of a growth in terms of environmental organization, say in India and also across the board. Now, this has been increasing slowly. In the very early 1990s, this was what you would call an AP, an arithmetic progression. This slowly became a geometric progression, and over the years, it has become an exponential progression. So today, compared to even 5 years ago, you have a lot of data. You have a lot of data about what something is and what something is not. You also have a huge number of specialists. So today you cannot make a claim and just get away with it, because there would be 10,000 experts who are specialists in the subject who can just rip you apart. 20 years ago, even 20 years, even 10 years ago, you can just about say anything. This is green, that is green. We are changing our old bulbs into LED bulbs, and therefore we are saving so much of energy and all that. Now you can't make those hollow claims anymore. Everything needs to be substantiated. Everything needs to be kind of given with absolute data, and you have to be transparent about it. You cannot get away with it like you did say earlier. Related to greenwashing is also a term called green scamming. Now, green scamming is something that people don't really talk about, because it's still not so much in the public discourse as a term. But you will all know. But let me just read out a few names here. So in the US, there was something called the National Wetlands Coalition. It was not what the name suggests. It was basically something which was sponsored by the oil drilling industry and the real estate industry. Now, there was also something called Friends of Earth Mountain. Again, it sounds very green. It is not. It was sponsored by a mining company. There was the Global Climate Coalition, which was a host of companies fighting against climate regulation. There's the funniest one is probably this is the European Institute for Climate and Energy. This is something which does not even have an office. It is just a website which propagates fake news about climate. So this is where green scamming comes in, and this is something that which will probably be tackled by people in the coming years. Now, the title of my presentation, even though I am not really technically making the presentation, was that, but I'll be mentioning regulations as well. See, things are still extremely nebulous right now. The reason being that the environmental laws per se, just environmental laws, are still kind of in a flux. Things are still either taking shape or being refined and being modified. Now, given the climate crisis that we are in right now. Now, only when you have laws about the environment, only then you can subsequently have laws about environmental claims, which is related to greenwashing. Now, among the laws and regulations that are currently in force, you have the Australian Trade Protection Act, where you cannot make misleading claims. You have the CMA in UK, which is the Competition and Markets Authority, which has a green claims code, so you cannot just about make any claim and get away with it. And the CMA in the UK has been cracking down all these kind of claims. There have been lots of penalties in the last few months or something, but they are going to get cracking on it all the more in the days to come. In the US, the FTC, which we had to brought out, which was the green what was it? Let me just take it. It was the green guidelines in 1982, which is now the green guides. Green guides, and it is being revised right now. Lots of industries don't come under the purview of it, but they will probably do, and maybe in the very few in the next few years. Now, among all the laws and regulations being brought in, the one that is likely to have the widest ramifications are the EU Green Claims Directive, which is still not does not have a legal framework in that sense. It is not being implemented. It has to pass by the member states and all, and then it will take a formal, absolute, not only legal, let's say a punitive shape, which means that if you make all those bogus claims about the environment or how you are saving the environment, then you will be penalized heavily. And the key phrase there is no data, no claim, which means that if you don't have the data, you cannot make any environmental claim. And this kind of this series of measures in the European Union is followed by a study that was carried out by the European Commission last year, I think, which found that over 50% of the environmental claims made by different companies were basically bogus. So that is why there is a crackdown in the European Union, and it matters to lots of other countries who actually export to the European Union. How does it matter? I'll give you just one example. You know, there are companies who make lots of claims about their emissions, and earlier you could just talk about your scope 1 emissions and get away with it. But now you need to talk about your scope 3 emissions, which are not in Europe, which are most likely in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, in Africa. So if those companies in Europe need to make certain claims, then certain things need to change in all these other regions and countries. Therefore, it is going to have a far-reaching impact than people think it is going to. It is going to change a lot of things. In India, it's going to change a lot of things in all these textile manufacturing hubs of Southeast Asia, like Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, in Bangladesh, across the border that side, in Pakistan, in African countries. So this is something that lots of people would really like to keep in mind. Now, this is the situation that we find ourselves in today. So the logical question, next question would be, what next? What next? The first thing is going to be about transparency. Now, transparency. So no, you cannot make, like they said, no data, no claims in Europe, which means that you have to be transparent about whatever data you have. You cannot just say that we are saving the climate because we have cut down our emissions by so much and so. I mean, you will have to say what your emissions are. You have to say where and how your scope 3, scope 1 emissions lie, where your scope 2 emissions lie, where your scope 3 emissions lie. And this is only about climate. I'm not even going into water usage, energy usage, etc. So this need for transparency is probably, in my opinion, probably going to gain currency, and all environmental claims sooner and later will need to quote, or you will need to attribute your claims to something or the other. You cannot say that we have cut down on chemical usage in a particular product without saying what all chemicals you are using, without saying, without disclosing which of these chemicals are harmful. So that is something that all manufactured countries will need to keep in mind, because you can't get away with it again. And see, there is something that is kind of an underlying thing about this entire thread that I've been speaking about. See, it is I'm primarily an investigative journalist, and we have something that we kind of believe in as a watchword or something, which is that it is never about the crime. It is always about the cover-up. So you can make a crime. You can say example would be, it has come out in recent years that Exxon, Shell knew about climate change about 40 to 50 years back, but they never disclosed it. They never disclosed it. It's absolutely criminal. But just a few days, 2 or 3 days back, there was an expose in the Guardian which talked about pesticides company who knew about the harmful effects of the pesticide, but they never disclosed it. They had the medical tests. They knew that these chemicals would have certain kind of impact on human health, but they brushed it under the carpet. It was not about the crime today. It is about the cover-up, and it will always be the cover-up, and that is what greenwashing actually does. It covers things, and like I said earlier, that it's going to be extremely difficult for anyone to get away with bogus environmental claims in today's world, because there are people who know and there are people who care. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your knowledge and also your lifetime experience about greenwashing and the related aspects. And it was really very useful